Welcome to the deep dive. Forget what you think you know about earthworms.
Hmm.
We've plunged into a stack of scientific sources, and trust me, these aren't just slimy garden dwellers.
Not at all.
We're talking about creatures with surprising complexity and a truly vital role in our world.
Absolutely. Our exploration takes us from their intricate internal workings, their anatomy,
Right.
to their powerful impact on everything from soil health to agriculture and even some, well, unexpected potential in medicine.
Medicine. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So our goal today is really to unearth the most fascinating and useful knowledge for you.
Okay, let's get into it. When you picture an earthworm, you probably don't think anatomical marvel, but our sources reveal some real surprises.
They really do.
For instance, their muscle structure. It generally forms a sort of closed loop. But did you know that common compost worms like Eisenia fetida have a radial arrangement? More like columns.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating there is how that radial setup likely helps them thrive in that loose, organic, rich compost environment.
Ah, makes sense.
It allows for different kinds of movement, more flexibility compared to, say, deep burrowing species.
Mm.
And that's just the start of their internal
Right,
complexity.
and then there's the chylum, this fluid-filled cavity inside. It's not just like empty space, is it?
Not at all. Think of the chylum as a sort of fluid-filled internal skeleton. It helps with movement, too.
Okay.
And it's divided into segments by these walls. They're called transverse septa.
Septa, got it.
And here's a detail that really highlights the diversity. The thickness and even the placement of these septa can actually help scientists identify different species.
No way.
Yeah, imagine finding a new species, like one recently discovered in China near the Muling River. It had these incredibly thick muscular septa attached in a really unique spot.
Wow.
It just shows how much we're still learning about them.
That's like finding a secret fingerprint. And inside, they've got this ventral nerve cord. Sounds pretty important.
Oh, it is. It's their main communication highway, running right along their belly. But it's not just a single strand. It's layered. You've got muscle protective sheets. It allows for complex signals and, importantly, rapid responses through the body.
Fast reactions.
Exactly. There are these giant nerve fibers within it that are crucial for, like, quick escape movements.
Ah.
And some species, like Lumbricus, might even have extra smaller giant fibers. And there's this internal dividing structure with little openings. It's a surprisingly sophisticated setup.
A sophisticated system for a creature without what we'd call a brain. Okay, moving to reproduction. Spermaticae, what are those about?
Okay, so spermaticae are paired organs where they store sperm after mating. Remember, they're hermaphrodites, but usually still need a partner.
Right, they exchange sperm.
Exactly. And the number of these storage sacs can vary hugely. Our common nightcrawler, Lumbricus terrestris, has 2 pairs in specific segments.
Just 2 pairs.
But then you look at some bimasto species, and they can have up to 7 pairs.
7. Wow. That points to really different strategies, doesn't it?
It really does. Different ways of managing reproduction across the earthworm world.
Now, what about that band, that thicker section you sometimes see? The clitellum. It's not always there, is it?
Correct. The clitellum develops only when the earthworm hits sexual maturity. It's absolutely key for reproduction.
How so?
Well, it's a glandular region. It has different kinds of cells that secrete mucus for mating, form the cocoon itself, and provide the albumin, the food, for the embryos inside.
So it makes the cocoon and stocks the pantry.
Pretty much. And interestingly, the different segments within the clitellum seem to have slightly different jobs.
Okay, so that band means it's a grown-up worm ready for action. But how do they breathe down there in the soil? No lungs, obviously.
They breathe right through their skin. Their outer layer is thin and moist, and that allows oxygen to just diffuse directly into their bloodstream.
Simple diffusion.
Which is exactly why staying moist is so critical for them. If they dry out, they can't breathe.
Makes sense.
Now, comparing breathing rates between species gets tricky because scientists use different methods.
Right, apples and oranges.
Kind of. But a key thing is that smaller worms generally breathe more relative to their size. It's about the surface area to body mass ratio.
More skin per gram of worm.
Exactly. Though some recent findings suggest that for Lumbricus terrestris, the bigger individuals might actually have higher overall respiration rates. So it's not just about relative size, it's complex.
So their skin is basically a lung. Makes you think twice about letting the ground dry out. Now, we touched on their nervous system. What kind of info are they actually sensing?
They're highly sensitive. Touch, pressure, definitely chemical cues in the soil that's huge for finding food or avoiding toxins.
Okay.
And their nervous system lets them process these things and coordinate movement, not just in one segment, across several. A touch here can trigger a ripple effect down the line.
So they're reacting, coordinating, not just random wiggling.
Definitely not random. What about light? Can they, see underground?
Good question. They don't have eyes like we do. But they do have light-sensitive cells, especially clustered on the prostomium, that little fleshy lobe over their mouth.
Ah, the front bit.
Yeah. These cells detect changes in light intensity. And different species react differently, which is interesting.
How so?
Well, Lumbricus terrestris, the night crawler, is actually drawn to very weak light, but it strongly avoids bright light.
Oh, okay.
But if it's stuck in bright light too long, its sensors can get overwhelmed, like saturated, and it might just stop reacting.
Huh. Sensory overload.
Exactly. Whereas other species, like Fertima, they just hate light. Period. Always photonegative.
So no sunbathing for earthworms then?
Definitely not. Now,
Yeah.
they always feel damp. What's their deal with water?
Water is absolutely life or death for them. That thin skin, the cuticle, and the mucus layer. They offer very little protection against drying out.
So they lose water easily.
Very easily. Through their skin, through excretory pores, mouth, anus,
Yeah.
everywhere. And consider this. They could be up to 85% water by weight.
Wow, that's mostly water.
So maintaining that hydration is a constant struggle. They can actually tolerate losing a surprising amount of water, maybe 70–75% of their total body water.
That's incredible resilience.
It is, but they also have strategies. They show what's called dehydration tropism, actively seeking moisture, probably guided by sensors on that prostomium again.
Following the dampness.
And if things get really bad, really dry, they might roll up into a ball, maybe even expel some of that coalomic fluid onto their skin to try and stay damp longer.
Desperate measures. Sounds tough. What if they get, cut in half? Can they grow back?
Regeneration.
Yeah.
Yes, they can regenerate lost parts, especially if it's the tail end that's lost. It's more common back there.
So chopping the head off is usually fatal?
Generally, yes,
Yeah.
though some species are better at it than others. A researcher named Gates initially thought only a few species could regenerate much at all, but later found more examples. But even if they regenerate, say, a tail, it's not always guaranteed they'll regrow the exact number of segments they lost. And the ability to regenerate decreases as you go from the tail towards the head.
Less likely further forward.
Right. And there's a really fascinating theory by a scientist named Moment. He proposed that electrical potential differences within the worm might actually control this regrowth.
Electrical control. Seriously.
Yeah, like a voltage gradient guides the regeneration. And maybe reaching a certain critical voltage signals it to stop once the original length is sort of restored.
That is wild. Electrical worms.
It's still being investigated, but it's a really cool idea about how they regulate growth and repair.
You really do learn something new every day.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've peered inside. Let's zoom out now. Where do they live, and how do their lifestyles differ?
Right, because earthworms aren't all the same. They have different ecological jobs, you could say. We usually group them into three main types: epigeic, anesic, and endogeic.
Okay, break those down for us.
Epigeic worms are the surface dwellers. They live right in the leaf litter, the top few centimeters of soil.
Like the compost worms we mentioned.
Exactly. Eisenia fetida, Lumbricus rubellus, those guys. They munch on decaying organic matter and tend to reproduce really quickly. Their main gig is processing that surface litter.
Got it. Topsoil recyclers.
Precisely. Then you have the anesic earthworms. Think of these as the soil architects.
Architects.
Yeah, they dig these deep, permanent, vertical burrows. They come up to the surface, often at night, grab dead leaves or other litter, and pull it down into their burrows to eat.
Ah, like in Nightcrawler, Lumbricus terrestris.
That's the classic example.
Yeah.
Aporectidia longa is another. Their burrows are super important for water infiltration and aeration deep in the soil.
And they leave those little piles of dirt, the castings, on the lawn.
Exactly. Those are often from anesic worms. Finally, you have the endogeic worms.
Okay.
These guys live in the mineral soil horizons, deeper down than the epigeics. They make complex, branching, mostly horizontal burrows.
And what do they eat down there?
They mainly consume soil itself, digesting the decomposed organic matter mixed within it. They generally don't come to the surface much.
So 3 distinct lifestyles. Surface feeders, deep tunnelers, and soil dwellers.
That's the gist. A scientist named Boucher came up with this triangular model to represent these groups, and it's really widely used now to understand earthworm ecology. It helps us see how they interact with the soil differently.
It's like different niches within the same soil community. What about just How many different kinds of earthworms are there? Is it a lot?
Oh, huge diversity globally. Thousands of species. Though, honestly, our detailed knowledge is often skewed towards Europe and North America.
Right, where a lot of the research happens.
Exactly. Different regions have their own unique worm communities adapted to the local climate and soil. And studies show certain species tend to hang out together, forming distinct associations in particular habitats.
Like little worm neighborhoods.
Kind of. And it's dynamic. If you change the land use, say plowing up a field and planting grass, the dominant earthworm species can shift over time as the environment changes.
So the worms reflect the soil's condition and history. What about their global spread? Are they everywhere?
Pretty much everywhere there's soil and moisture, yeah. Big families like the Megascelicidae and Lumbricidae are found across continents.
Lumbricidae. Those are the ones common in Europe and North America.
That's right. Their native range is mostly Holarctic, the northern continents.
Right.
But here's a mind blower related to that.
Lay on me.
Virtually all the earthworms you find in Canada today, they're introduced species.
Introduced. You mean like invasive?
Well, introduced is the term. Peregrine, or Anthropocris, meaning spread by humans. The last ice age basically wiped out native earthworms across much of Canada and the northern U.S.
The glacier scoured them away.
Pretty much. And earthworms don't disperse very quickly on their own. So when European colonists arrived, they brought European earthworm species with them, likely in soil, ballast, or plant roots.
So Canada's entire earthworm fauna hitched a ride.
Largely, yes, it's a massive ecological change. And it's not just Canada. Many species from, say, South America, West Africa, Central America have become widespread globally, again, likely thanks to human transport.
You've accidentally been global earthworm distributors.
Okay, what about their life cycles? How do they reproduce and grow?
The basic pattern is pretty similar across many families. They produce cocoons, which are like little egg cases.
Right, we talked about the clitellum making those.
Yep. Inside the cocoon, the embryos develop, and eventually juvenile worms hatch out. They grow, reach sexual maturity, developing that clitellum, and the cycle continues.
Are they mostly hermaphrodites?
Yes, most have both male and female organs, but cross-fertilization, mating with another worm, is still the norm for most species we're talking about.
Okay.
No, there are differences. Lumbricids, for instance, tend to produce fewer cocoons overall compared to some other families. Lifespans vary too. Some might live just the year, others several years.
And they adapt their cycles. Well, yeah. We see examples like a species in the U.S. having a strict annual cycle, while studies in West Africa show species like Milsonia anomala surviving harsh dry seasons by basically pausing development as it matures underground.
Clever survival tactics. It's amazing how these seemingly simple creatures manage. Okay, we know what they are, where they live. How do scientists actually count them? It seems tricky.
It definitely requires some effort. Since they're hidden underground, several methods get used. Hand sorting is one, literally digging up soil samples, spreading them out, and picking out the worm.
Labor intensive.
Very, but it's direct. Then there's formalin extraction. You pour a dilute formaldehyde solution on the ground.
Formalin, like for preserving
A
specimens.
very weak solution, yeah.
Hmm.
It irritates the worms, and they tend to come to the surface to escape it. It's effective, but, there are ecological concerns about adding chemicals.
Right, a bit harsh. Any other ways?
Electrical methods are interesting. You pass a current to the soil, which also encourages worms to surface.
Zapping them out.
Sort of. But how well it works can actually depend on the soil's pH, its acidity.
Huh, weird.
Vibration techniques have been tried too, like thumping the ground, but they're generally not considered very reliable or quantitative, especially for lumbricids.
Not like fishing where worm grunting works.
Apparently not as effectively for scientific sampling. And finally, you can count worm casts, those surface piles. That gives you an index of activity.
But not necessarily the actual number of worms underground.
Exactly. It tells you they're active, but not the total population size.
So multiple methods, each with pros and cons. What kind of numbers do they find? Are we talking dozens, hundreds per square meter?
It varies massively.
Yeah.
You might find just a few per square meter in some poor soils,
Huh.
but in really rich habitats like some grasslands or tropical rainforests, you could be looking at hundreds, maybe even thousands.
Thousands per square meter, wow.
Yeah, the biomass can be huge. But these numbers fluctuate a lot. Seasonally, populations change with rainfall and temperature. A study in Australia showed Aparectidia trapezois populations boom after rain.
Makes sense with the moisture.
And even food quality matters. Like the carbon to nitrogen ratio in vermicompost systems can affect whether you have more young worms or more adults.
Interesting.
Plus, many species migrate up and down in the soil profile through the year, chasing the right moisture and temperature. They aren't just staying put.
Constantly adjusting. So boiling it down, what are the absolute key environmental factors dictating where worms thrive?
Moisture is number one. Absolutely critical, as we said, for breathing, movement, everything. They actively seek it out, that dehydration tropism.
Right.
And even their cocoons have adaptations. Some species cocoons are better at surviving droughts than others. Optimal moisture levels vary, maybe 12–30% soil moisture content, depending on the study and species.
Okay, moisture first. What else?
Temperature's huge. It controls their growth rate, how fast they mature, when they reproduce.
It's like cold-blooded animals.
Exactly. Different species have different optimum temperatures. For Lumbricus terrestris, cocoon production might peak around 15 degrees C, but the cocoons hatch fastest at 20 degrees C.
So it's complex. Fastest isn't always best overall.
Right. The temperature for quickest growth might not be the same as the temperature range where they live longest or reproduce most successfully over time.
Gotcha. Moisture, temperature, what else?
pH. Soil acidity or alkalinity has a big influence on which species are present and how abundant they are. Some worms just can't handle acidic soils, while others are more tolerant. Liming acidic soils to raise the pH often boosts earthworm numbers.
Okay, soil type must matter too, right? Sandy versus clay.
Definitely. Soil texture affects moisture retention, nutrient availability, aeration, even how easy it is to burrow.
Makes sense.
Research in tropical forests suggests you find more geophagous species, the soil eaters in nutrient-rich soils, and more epigeic litter feeders where the soil itself is poorer. They adapt to the resources.
And food supply itself.
Oh, absolutely fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
Earthworms eat a wide range of decaying organic stuff. The amount and quality of food directly impacts population size, which species dominate, how fast they grow, how many cocoons they produce.
More food, more worms.
Generally, yes. And nitrogen-rich food seems particularly good for growth and reproduction. Interestingly, even when there's plenty of leaf litter on the surface, some species still ingest significant amounts of soil.
Really? Why?
Probably from minerals or maybe the microbes in the soil. It's estimated some species turn over astonishing amounts of soil each year, tons per hectare in some environments.
Wow. They're really processing the earth. Okay, so we know they live in the environment, but how do they change it? What are their big ecosystem functions?
They're massive players, huge impact. One key role is stimulating decomposition.
How do they do that?
By eating litter, they shred it into smaller pieces as it passes through their gut. This increases the surface area.
Making it easier for bacteria and fungi to break it down further.
Exactly. Plus, the conditions in their gut can select for certain microbes. So fresh casts often show a burst of microbial activity compared to the surrounding soil.
A little microbial boost.
Yeah, though interestingly, as casts age, they can sometimes protect organic matter physically, slowing down decomposition later. It's complex. And some worms even have specific symbiotic bacteria living inside their nephridia, their excretion organs.
Worms have kidney buddies.
Kind of. Species-specific bacteria helping process waste. It's pretty specialized.
Okay, so they help break stuff down. What about the soil structure we talked about?
Their burrowing is critical. Those channels they create improve aeration, let water soak in better instead of running off, and make it easier for plant roots to penetrate deeper.
Like natural tilling.
In a way, yes. And their castings, the excreted soil, help bind soil particles together into aggregates. This improves soil stability, makes it less prone to erosion, and helps it hold water better.
Do different types of worms have different effects here?
Yes. The deep vertical burrows of anisic worms have a different impact than the extensive horizontal networks of endogeic worms. Both are important, just in different ways. The amount of soil they move through casting can be staggering. Reports range from a few tons to hundreds of tons per hectare per year, depending on the place.
They are serious earth movers. What about soil fertility? Nutrients.
They're key players in nutrient cycling too. As organic matter and soil pass through their gut, nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium get converted into forms that are more readily available for plants to take up.
So the nutrients in worm casts are easier for plants to use.
Generally, yes. Studies consistently find higher concentrations of available nutrients in fresh casts compared to the bulk soil.
How much does that contribute to plant needs overall?
That's debated. Some calculations suggest it's a significant annual input, especially for nitrogen, maybe tens of kilograms per hectare per year. Others argue it might be more about accelerating the cycling rather than adding massive new amounts, but they definitely make nutrients more available.
So definitely beneficial for fertility. Are there ever downsides? Can they cause problems?
In some specific, usually unusual situations, yes. Extremely high densities of certain species might potentially damage crops by feeding on roots or disturbing seedlings with their burrowing. Lumbricus terrestris has occasionally been implicated.
Okay. Rare but possible.
And there's some evidence they can help spread certain soil-borne plant pathogens like fusarium fungi or parasitic nematodes by carrying them on or in their bodies.
Accidental couriers.
Yeah. Also, by removing the protective surface litter layer, some species, particularly the anisics pulling leaves down, can leave the soil surface bare, which could potentially increase erosion risk in some settings.
So, mostly good, but a complex picture. What about things eating them? Are they important prey?
Hugely important. They're a protein-rich meal for a vast array of animals. Shrews absolutely love them. Many snakes like night adders, garter snakes, even blind snakes.
Snakes eat worms.
Oh yes. Frogs, toads, newts, salamanders, caecilians. Many amphibians rely heavily on them. Birds, of course, think robins pulling worms from lawns. Mammals like badgers, foxes, moles. The list is long.
A cornerstone of the food web, then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And interestingly, where non-native earthworms have been introduced, like in parts of North America.
That we talked about in Canada.
Exactly. Those introduced worms have become a major food source for native predators, like some salamander species, changing their diets.
Wow, another ripple effect. Do worms themselves get sick? Parasites?
Oh, for sure. They have their own share of parasites and pathogens. Internal ones include various protozoa, like ciliates and sporozoa, nematodes, even the larvae of some flies that develop inside them.
Flies develop inside earthworms. Yikes.
Yeah, nature's pretty metal sometimes. Gregarines, a type of protozoan parasite, are particularly common in their gut and body cavity.
A whole hidden world of worm troubles. Now, let's shift to how we use them directly. Composting comes to mind immediately.
Vermicomposting, yes, it's a really big and growing area. Using specific earthworm species, mainly the epigeic types like Eisenia fetida and Eisenia andrae, to break down organic waste.
What kind of waste?
All sorts. Sewage sludge, brewery waste, pulp from paper mills, food scraps, animal manures, garden waste, even waste from mushroom farming.
That's a huge range.
It is. These worms are incredibly efficient at converting this waste into a fantastic nutrient-rich soil amendment, the vermicompost. There's global interest in this as a sustainable way to manage waste and create valuable fertilizer.
How is it usually done? Big factories.
It can be scaled up, but often it involves relatively low-cost systems like floor beds or windrows, indoors or outdoors. You just need to maintain the right conditions for the worms.
What conditions do they need?
For Eisenia fetida, the compost worm, you need the right temperature range, moisture level, typically quite high, 60–80%, good oxygen supply, and you need to avoid high levels of ammonia or salts and keep the pH roughly neutral.
Get that right and they'll munch away.
Pretty much. And the end product, the vermicompost, is well documented as being excellent for plant growth.
Okay, composting is huge. Any other uses? You mentioned medicine earlier.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Earthworms have a surprisingly long history in traditional medicine across many cultures. China, India, parts of Africa, and Latin America.
What were they used for?
All sorts of ailments. Fever reduction, pain relief, treating respiratory issues, and modern research is starting to investigate some of these traditional claims.
Finding anything.
Some studies suggest extracts can have antioxidant, liver protective, antimicrobial, even anti-cancer properties in lab settings. It's still early days for rigorous testing, but there's potential there.
Wow. What else?
Well, they're very high in protein, so there's perennial interest in using them as feed for animals, like poultry or fish, maybe even potentially for humans in some contexts.
Worm protein shakes. Maybe not yet.
Maybe not yet. And historically, they were even used in some rather crude early forms of pregnancy testing and for testing potential carcinogens, though obviously we have much better methods now.
Okay, a really diverse range of interactions. Finally, let's talk about agriculture and pollution. How do farming practices and chemicals affect these beneficial critters?
Agricultural practices can have major impacts, both good and bad. Tillage, especially deep, intensive plowing, is generally negative. It destroys burrows, injures worms, buries their food source.
So no-till or minimum tillage would be better for them?
Generally, yes. Leaving crop residues, the stalks and leaves left after harvest on the surface, can also be beneficial, providing food and cover.
Okay. What about fertilizers?
It's complicated. High doses of some nitrogen fertilizers, especially ammonium sulfate, applied over long periods can decrease worm populations, possibly by acidifying the soil or through direct toxicity.
But plants need nitrogen.
You're right. And some studies suggest lower nitrogen levels, especially in limited soils, might actually increase worm numbers by boosting plant growth and thus food supply. Adding phosphorus or potassium might sometimes lessen the negative effects of nitrogen too. It's not a simple picture.
Depends on the dose, the type, the soil.
Exactly. Pesticides are another big one. Insecticides, fungicides, herbicides. Many commonly used ones can be toxic to earthworms.
Which ones are particularly bad?
Organophosphates like chlorpyrifos, dursban, carbamates like carbaryl 7, some older organochlorines. They can cause direct mortality or affect reproduction and behavior. Even some herbicides can have negative impacts, though often less severe than insecticides.
Can worms avoid contaminated soil?
Yes, they often show avoidance behavior, moving away from pesticide hotspots. This is actually used sometimes as a simple bioassay, a way to test if soil is contaminated.
They vote with their bodies. What about heavy metals from pollution or sludge application?
Earthworms can accumulate heavy metals like copper, zinc, lead, cadmium, mercury, arsenic from the soil into their tissues.
Does it harm them?
It can, though some populations seem to develop a degree of tolerance or resistance over time in contaminated areas.
But if they accumulate metals and then something eats the worm?
Exactly. That's a pathway for transferring those metals up the food chain, which is a major concern.
Okay. Any other pollutants?
Things like PCBs have been shown to accumulate in worms. There's even research looking if worms could potentially help bioremediate some organic pollutants, breaking them down. And there's study into things like veterinary medicines, like ivermectin used for cattle parasites.
Does that harm worms when it passes through the cow?
One study looked at ivermectin and fenbendazole levels excreted in dung and found no significant adverse effects on Lumbricus terrestris at those natural concentrations. So, maybe not a major issue there.
Good to know. What about newer concerns like nanomaterials?
That's an emerging area. So far, most studies haven't shown much direct lethal effect from nanoparticles on earthworms. But there are concerns about potential long-term, sublethal, or indirect effects on their health or soil processes. Still lots to learn there.
A constantly evolving picture of how our actions impact them.
Absolutely.
Well, this deep dive has certainly revealed just how incredibly complex and frankly vital these creatures are. There's so much more than just, fish bait or garden diggers.
Absolutely. They are crucial engineers of our soil ecosystems, impacting everything from decomposition and nutrient cycling to soil structure and the potential uses.
Yeah.
They're quite remarkable.
We definitely uncovered some surprising details that Chinese species with unique anatomy, the electrical growth theory, the sheer diversity of predators, those potential medicinal properties.
It really broadens your perspective on them.
It definitely gives you a new appreciation for the wrigglers you might find in your own garden or local park. We really hope you keep exploring this fascinating world beneath our feet.
And thinking about it all leaves us with a pretty compelling question, doesn't it?
What's that?
Given everything we know about their profound impact on soil health, their role in waste management, even these hints of medicinal use, how might a deeper understanding, a real partnership with earthworms, shape our future? How could it change agriculture, waste treatment, maybe even medicine?
Working with the worms more consciously, that's definitely something to mull over.